you represent an icon on screen? Somebody that is so well known and so beloved and so iconic? That question is at the center of Mathieu Amalric's Barbara. So for those who don't know, Barbara was a French singer-songwriter whose bulk of her career was in the 70s and 80s, but she ended up working up until the 90s until she died. And she is an extremely iconic character within French culture. She managed to achieve commercial and popular success, but was also very well received by critics. And in that sense, I guess that the closest analogy I could make would be with somebody like Leonard Cohen. The movie was directed by Mathieu Amalric, who is mostly known for his work as an actor. He sort of rose to prominence in the 90s as Arnaud Desplechin's muse, and he's appeared in basically every one of his films. But in the mid to late 2000s, he started appearing in a lot of American films, I guess most notably Munich, and because The Diving Bell and The Butterfly did so well when it was released on the American market, he was able to get a role as a bad guy in a Bond film. He was the bad guy in Quantum of Solace, which is the Bond film that everybody hates, but that I kind of actually like. Over the last few years, he started to direct some feature-length films, and in his latest outing, he tackles head-on one of the most beloved characters in French history. So instead of making a standard biopic, Amalric decides to put his movie within a sort of meta framework. What that means is that the main actress, Jeanne Balibar, plays an actress in a movie playing Barbara. So there's this movie within a movie element, this meta-narrative structure that emerges. And Amalric himself, who is the director of the film, and obviously a great actor, plays the director of said movie. He totally dispenses himself of any of the key beats that you would generally associate with this kind of film. Instead, he opts for something that's a little more like these scenes that flow within one another. He never really gives a specific date. There's never a date that shows on screen. You never know where you really are in time. You don't get the standard, birth, childhood, fame, death. And everything seems to be told kind of out of order. But again, since you don't really have any reference for time, it's sort of difficult to really know. And he sort of almost revels in the fact that he is omitting these key scenes that most biopics would construct themselves around. And essentially, the mileage that you'll get out of this film depends on how much you enjoy watching an actress lose herself in a role. For me, I found this movie absolutely transcendental and fascinating. I tend not to really respond to most biopics that I see. I find that they generally reduce a person's life to these sort of greatest hits, like a greatest hits album almost. Large parts of those films are generally about reusing and recreating imagery that we're already familiar with, and generally I find that they're also guilty of being very simplistic in terms of psychology, almost reducing somebody's actions to these very basic, simple points like, oh no, my daddy didn't love me enough, and things like that. And I generally find that pretty insulting when you are supposed to represent the real life of somebody that existed. I mean, I find it barely acceptable in standard narrative films, but when your actual goal is to be faithful to somebody's life, I find that pretty insulting. And this movie does away with all of that, and I was fine with it. More than that, I was very happy. I was just content to watch Jeanne Balibar do her thing on screen. She is wonderful in this film, one of the best performances I've seen all year, if not the best. She illuminates every single frame of this film, and she just doesn't she never imitates the singer she's trying to portray. She just sort of creates a whole new version of Barbara, one that's just as valid and just as real as the real person. And Amalric's direction keeps it simple enough so that it never detracts from his actress's performance, but at the same time, he really pops up here and there with some real stylistic flourishes. He manages to use a lot of archival footage of the real Barbara which he managed to get from several documentaries that were shot when she went on tour in the 70s, and they're all shot on 16 millimeter. And within that, he himself intersplices scenes that he shoots with Jeanne Balibar, also on 16 millimeter, and it becomes very difficult at some points to actually know what is archival footage and what is his footage, and who is the real Barbara and who isn't. And that's a really interesting use of formats that he just puts within the middle of his film. He's always playing around with this sort of idea of the real person, the persona that she performs, the actress playing both that real person but also that public persona, who are two different things generally. And all those sequences are sort of punctuated by two absolutely beautiful scenes. The first is when Balibar is in her apartment and she's sort of prepping for her role. So she's projecting these giant images of Barbara onto a white wall in her apartment, and she gets in front of the screen. She sort of analyzes her body language. She starts to imitate her, she really starts to work with the physical attributes that you would imagine an actor goes through in these transformative experiences. And because she's in front of the screen and the image is being projected, the image is also being projected on her, and you have the real Barbara and her sort of melding together, which is obviously a great metaphor for the entire film. And towards the end, which sort of closes the film, but not really, because you've got an extra 10 minutes on there, is a sequence in which Jeanne Balibar is performing a song. And up until then, she has performed the songs in her own voice. She actually sings, and she performs them very well. But in this case, the voice that is coming out of her mouth is Barbara, the actual Barbara. Again, just a perfect moment to close the film on. And I was sort of bummed out that the movie went on for a little bit. I thought that was just a perfect, beautiful little moment to sort of just cut to black and let the spectator sort of wallow in what he's just seen. And it sort of took the wind out of the sails for the movie for the last 10 minutes, but still, up until then, I was just so fully committed into what I was seeing on screen that it didn't really matter. And actually, before going into the film, I was kind of worried because of the framework and because of the director putting himself in the film. I was kind of worried that it was going to fall into this sort of narcissistic trap, but actually not at all. It's a remarkable cinematic object. That being said, I can totally understand that some people maybe wouldn't really get into it. If you have no reference point for who Barbara was as a singer, as a cultural figure, I don't know what you'll really get out of the film. Although that being said, I'm not anything close to an expert on her. I knew who she was and I knew some of the songs, but I really couldn't say that. But I really can't say that I knew her very well. And in a way, it's kind of a gift because this movie is sort of this alluring, intriguing thing, and maybe that'll push you in the direction of wanting to listen to more of her songs. Maybe that'll make you want to, read up on some of her biography. And Amalric never feels the need to fall into something that's too almost educational or instructional. He forgoes any of that. But also, some people are going to be pissed off by the absolute refusal the film has to actually have a plot. But if you're interested in an almost theoretical university course study of an actress, of acting, and of what acting can be, then this is really going to be something that's quite interesting to you. And that makes the movie sound cold. It's absolutely not. There's a lot of emotion actually within the film. It's just that any emotion comes from the imagery and the music and never from any of the plot points, which I'm absolutely fine with, again, because you can get story from books, you can get story and plot from television, but there is something incredibly powerful about cinema, that it can derive so much emotion from simply images and sound, and that in and of itself makes this pure cinema. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you wouldn't mind hitting that like or subscribe button, it would be very much appreciated. And until next time, see ya!